I woke up with a pounding headache and the taste of salt on my lips. My eyes fluttered open, and I squinted against the harsh sunlight filtering through the palm fronds above me. Disoriented, I sat up and took in my surroundings. I was on a beach, the sand cool and gritty beneath my fingers. The sound of waves crashing against the shore was rhythmic, almost soothing, if not for the gnawing sense of dread settling in my stomach. How did I get here? The last thing I remembered was being on a boat, heading for a weekend getaway with friends. We were supposed to arrive at a small island, a paradise where we could unwind and escape the stresses of our daily lives. But this wasn't the island we had in mind. I struggled to my feet, my legs wobbly and weak. As I scanned the beach, I saw no sign of my friends, no sign of anyone. Panic bubbled up inside me, but I forced it down. Panicking wouldn't help. I needed to figure out where I was and what had happened. I walked along the shore, calling out for my friends. My voice sounded small and weak, swallowed by the vastness of the ocean and the dense jungle behind me. The only response was the call of seabirds and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. The island seemed deserted. As I ventured further, I came across a small clearing with a makeshift campsite. There was a charred circle of stones where a fire had once burned, and a few scattered belongings: a torn backpack, a water bottle, and a pair of broken sunglasses. The scene looked hastily abandoned, as if someone had left in a hurry. I bent down to inspect the items, my heart racing. The backpack was ripped open, its contents strewn about. I found a map of the island, partially torn and stained with what looked like blood. My hands shook as I examined it, trying to make sense of the markings. It showed a rough layout of the island, with an X marking a spot in the center. Was this some sort of treasure map? Or something more sinister? A sense of being watched prickled the back of my neck. I stood up quickly, my eyes darting around the clearing. The jungle was dense and dark, shadows shifting with the movement of the leaves. I felt like I was being watched, but I couldn't see anyone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" Silence. I took a deep breath and decided to head towards the X on the map. Maybe it would lead me to answers, or at least to safety. Clutching the map, I started into the jungle, the dense foliage closing in around me. Every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves made me jump, my senses on high alert. After what felt like hours of pushing through the underbrush, I stumbled into another clearing. My heart sank. In the center of the clearing was a piece of clothing, drenched in blood. I recognized it immediately. It was the shirt my friend Sarah had been wearing. Panic surged through me, and I had to fight to keep it under control. "Sarah!" I shouted, my voice breaking. "Sarah, where are you?" No response. Only the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. I dropped to my knees, clutching the shirt, tears streaming down my face. My mind raced with horrific possibilities. What had happened to Sarah? And where were the others? As I sat there, trying to pull myself together, I heard a rustling sound behind me. My heart leapt into my throat. I turned slowly, my eyes wide with fear. Emerging from the shadows was a figure. At first, I could only make out a dark silhouette, but as it moved closer, I saw it was a man. His clothes were tattered, his face gaunt and hollow-eyed. He looked like he had been through hell. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice barely more than a whisper. The man didn't respond. He just stared at me, his eyes empty and void of emotion. A shiver ran down my spine. There was something deeply unsettling about him. Then, without a word, he turned and disappeared back into the jungle. I was left alone in the clearing, clutching Sarah's bloodied shirt, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The sense of being watched was stronger now, and I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to keep moving, had to find a way off this island. But as I turned to leave, I heard another rustle in the bushes, this time closer. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to see through the dense foliage. Suddenly, a hand reached out, grabbing my ankle and pulling me to the ground. I screamed, kicking and struggling to free myself. The grip tightened, and I was dragged into the underbrush. I thrashed wildly, trying to break free, but the hand held firm. My vision blurred with tears and fear. Just when I thought I couldn't fight any longer, the grip loosened, and I was released. I scrambled to my feet, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked around, but there was no sign of whoever or whatever had grabbed me. I was alone again, but the sense of being watched was more intense than ever. Shaken and terrified, I stumbled back onto the path marked on the map. I had to keep moving, had to find a way to survive. But the island felt like it was closing in on me, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. As the sun began to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the island, I knew one thing for certain: I wasn't alone here. Something or someone was hunting me. And I had to stay one step ahead if I wanted to survive. I pressed on, my mind racing with fear and adrenaline. Each step felt heavier than the last, but I couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Not when my life depended on it. The island held its secrets tightly, but I was determined to uncover them, even if it meant facing my worst nightmares. As darkness fell, I found a small cave to take shelter in. My body was exhausted, but sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I sat with my back against the cool stone, clutching the map and Sarah's shirt, my eyes fixed on the cave entrance. Every sound, every shadow, sent a jolt of fear through me. Hours passed, the island shrouded in an oppressive silence. Just as I began to drift into an uneasy sleep, I heard a soft, deliberate rustling at the cave entrance. My heart pounded as I stared into the darkness, waiting for whatever was out there to reveal itself. Then, a shadow moved. And I knew my nightmare was far from over. The cave was pitch black, save for the occasional glint of moonlight filtering through cracks in the stone. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to hear over my own ragged breaths. The rustling at the cave entrance grew louder, more deliberate. I held my breath, every muscle tensed. Then, silence. I waited, ears pricked for any sound, any sign of movement. Minutes ticked by like hours, each one heavier with dread than the last. Just as I began to think it was my imagination, the rocks at the cave entrance started to shift, a grinding noise that echoed through the cavern. Someone was blocking me in. Panic surged through me. I scrambled to the back of the cave, pressing myself against the cold stone, my mind racing. I was trapped, helpless, and my unseen tormentor was sealing me in. I had to get out. I couldn't stay here. Not like this. With renewed determination, I felt around for anything I could use to dig my way out. My fingers brushed against a sharp rock, and I seized it, attacking the loose rocks at the entrance with frantic energy. Each strike sent a jolt through my arms, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The rocks were heavy and resistant, but I made progress, inch by painstaking inch. Sweat poured down my face, mingling with tears of frustration and fear. The light was almost completely blocked now, but I kept going, driven by sheer will to survive. Finally, I managed to pry loose a gap just big enough to squeeze through. I pushed my way out, gasping for air as I tumbled into the night. The cool breeze against my skin was a stark contrast to the stifling air in the cave. But I had no time to relish it. I had to keep moving. I stood up, glancing around the dark jungle. The moon cast eerie shadows, and every rustle of leaves seemed to hide a lurking threat. I needed to find shelter, somewhere safer than the cave. I needed to find a place to think, to plan my next move. My heart was still pounding as I started walking, each step a cautious probe into the darkness. The jungle was alive with the sounds of night, but none of them were comforting. An owl hooted somewhere in the distance, and the rustling of unseen creatures kept my nerves on edge. As I moved deeper into the jungle, I heard footsteps behind me, soft, measured, deliberate. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was only the sound of my pounding heart. Then, they started again, closer this time. I bolted, adrenaline surging through my veins. The underbrush tore at my clothes and skin, but I didn't care. I had to get away, had to outrun whatever was following me. Branches whipped at my face, and roots threatened to trip me, but I kept running, driven by sheer terror. The footsteps were right behind me now, matching my pace, relentless and unyielding. I couldn't see my pursuer, but I could feel their presence, a dark shadow that clung to me, no matter how fast I ran. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I stumbled into a small clearing. In the center was a weathered, abandoned hut. It looked like it had been there for years, its roof sagging and walls covered in vines. But it was shelter, and it was my only hope. I dashed inside, slamming the rickety door behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I pressed my back against the door, listening. The footsteps stopped outside, and I heard a soft, almost mocking chuckle. My blood ran cold. The hut was dark and musty, filled with the smell of decay. As my eyes adjusted, I saw old furniture, broken and scattered, and papers littering the floor. I bent down to pick one up, my hands shaking. The paper was covered in frantic, scrawled notes about a hunt. My heart sank as I realized what this place was: a hunting lodge, and I was the prey. I had no time to dwell on the horror. The door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. I backed away, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on a rusted knife half buried in the dirt floor. I grabbed it, holding it out in front of me as I backed into a corner. The door creaked and groaned under the assault, but it held. For now. I knew it wouldn't last. My pursuer was determined, and I was running out of options. I glanced around the hut, looking for another way out. There was a small window on the far wall, barely big enough to squeeze through. It was my only chance. I rushed to the window, prying it open with trembling hands. The door behind me gave another loud crack, and I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. I pulled myself up, struggling to fit through the narrow opening. My heart raced as I heard the door finally give way, splintering under the force of the attack. I managed to wriggle through the window just as the door crashed open. I fell to the ground outside, scrambling to my feet and running without looking back. The jungle closed in around me, the darkness swallowing me whole. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The footsteps started again, relentless and terrifying, following me into the night. I was no longer just running for my life, I was running for my sanity. Every step was a battle against the fear threatening to overwhelm me. But I had to keep going. I had to survive. The jungle seemed endless, a maze of shadows and sounds that all felt hostile. My breath came in sharp, painful gasps as I pushed through the dense foliage. I could still hear the footsteps, a constant reminder that my pursuer was never far behind. Then, as if by some cruel twist of fate, I tripped over a root and went sprawling to the ground. Pain shot through my ankle, and I cried out, quickly biting my lip to stifle the sound. I couldn't let them hear me. I couldn't let them find me. I crawled to a nearby tree, using it for support as I struggled to stand. My ankle throbbed, but I forced myself to move, hobbling through the jungle. I had to keep going. I couldn't let the fear paralyze me. Every rustle, every snap of a twig sent my heart racing. The jungle was alive with the sounds of night, but it felt like it was conspiring against me, each noise amplifying my terror. I could feel the eyes on me, always watching, always waiting. I stumbled through the underbrush, each step a struggle against the pain and fear. The footsteps were still there, a constant, haunting presence. But I had to keep going. I had to find a way off this island. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw a faint light in the distance. Hope surged through me, giving me the strength to keep moving. The light grew brighter as I approached, and I realized it was coming from another clearing. I limped into the clearing, my heart pounding with relief and fear. In the center was a small campfire, its flames flickering in the night. But there was no one around. The sense of being watched was stronger than ever, and I knew I wasn't alone. I approached the campfire cautiously, my eyes scanning the darkness. As I reached the fire, I saw something that made my blood run cold: a note, pinned to the ground with a knife. I picked it up with trembling hands, the words scrawled in a familiar, frantic hand. "Welcome to the hunt." My heart pounded as I realized the truth. I wasn't just lost on this island. I was being hunted. And the game had only just begun. Just as the realization sank in, I heard a twig snap behind me. I turned, my breath catching in my throat. The shadowy figure stood at the edge of the clearing, watching me with those empty, hollow eyes. I backed away, my mind racing. I had to find a way to escape. I had to survive. The figure took a step forward, and I knew I had to make a choice: fight or flee. Without another thought, I turned and ran, the darkness closing in around me. The footsteps followed, relentless and terrifying, echoing through the night. The island was a maze of shadows and sounds, each one more terrifying than the last. I stumbled through the dense foliage, my heart pounding in my chest. My ankle throbbed with each step, but I couldn't stop. The footsteps behind me were relentless, a constant reminder that I was being hunted. I pushed through the underbrush, the leaves scratching at my skin and clothes. The moonlight filtered through the trees, casting eerie shadows that danced in my peripheral vision. Every rustle, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. The sense of being watched was overwhelming, and I knew my pursuer was never far behind. I reached a small clearing and paused to catch my breath. The island was eerily silent, save for the distant crashing of waves. I scanned my surroundings, looking for any sign of my tormentor. The jungle loomed around me, dark and foreboding. I knew I couldn't stay here for long. I needed to find shelter, somewhere I could rest and plan my next move. As I turned to leave the clearing, I heard a chilling scream echo through the night. It was a sound of pure terror, and it sent a shiver down my spine. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The scream came from the direction I had been heading, and I knew I had to investigate. It might be one of my friends. They might need help. I pushed forward, my senses on high alert. The jungle seemed to close in around me, the darkness becoming more oppressive with each step. The scream had come from somewhere nearby, but the dense foliage made it hard to pinpoint the exact location. I moved cautiously, my ears straining for any sound that might guide me. Suddenly, the underbrush parted, and I found myself on a narrow path leading to a small beach. The moonlight reflected off the water, casting an eerie glow over the scene. There, lying on the sand, was a makeshift raft. It looked hastily constructed, but it might be my ticket off this island. I approached the raft, my heart racing with a mix of hope and fear. As I examined it, I noticed signs of a struggle: broken branches, footprints in the sand, and a trail of blood leading into the jungle. My stomach churned with dread. Something terrible had happened here. Just as I was about to investigate further, I heard another sound: a soft, almost mocking chuckle. I turned to see the shadowy figure standing on the edge of the jungle, watching me. The moonlight caught the glint of a knife in their hand, and my blood ran cold. I backed away, my mind racing. I needed to get to the raft, but the figure blocked my path. They took a step forward, and I knew I had to act fast. I turned and ran, heading back into the dense jungle. The figure followed, their footsteps echoing through the night. The jungle was a blur of darkness and shadows as I fled, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the figure gaining on me, their breath heavy and labored. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning with the effort. I had to stay ahead. I had to survive. I stumbled into another clearing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. In the center was an old, dilapidated hut. It looked abandoned, but it might provide some temporary shelter. I rushed inside, slamming the door behind me. The hut was dark and musty, filled with the smell of decay. As I searched for something to barricade the door, I heard the figure outside. They were close, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. My heart raced as I scanned the room, my eyes landing on a pile of broken furniture. I grabbed a chair and wedged it under the door handle, hoping it would hold. The footsteps stopped outside the hut, and I held my breath, straining to hear. There was a long, tense silence, followed by a soft, deliberate knock on the door. My blood ran cold. They were toying with me, playing a sick game. I backed away, my eyes darting around the dark room. The hut was filled with old, rotting furniture and piles of yellowed papers. I picked up one of the papers, my hands shaking. It was covered in frantic, scrawled notes about a hunt and detailed plans of the island. My stomach churned with fear. This was no ordinary island. It was a hunting ground, and I was the prey. Suddenly, the door shuddered as something heavy slammed against it. I dropped the paper and backed further into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The door held for now, but I knew it wouldn't last. I needed to find another way out. My eyes landed on a small window on the far wall. It was barely big enough to squeeze through, but it was my only chance. I rushed to the window, prying it open with trembling hands. The door behind me gave another loud crack, and I knew it wouldn't hold much longer. I pulled myself up, struggling to fit through the narrow opening. My heart raced as I heard the door finally give way, splintering under the force of the attack. I managed to wriggle through the window just as the door crashed open. I fell to the ground outside, scrambling to my feet and running without looking back. The jungle closed in around me, the darkness swallowing me whole. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The footsteps followed, relentless and terrifying, echoing through the night. The jungle seemed to close in around me, the darkness growing thicker with each passing moment. My breaths came in ragged gasps as I sprinted through the dense underbrush, the sounds of my pursuers' footsteps echoing relentlessly behind me. Every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves sent a jolt of terror through me. I had to keep moving, had to stay ahead. I stumbled into a narrow path and followed it, my heart pounding in my chest. The path twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the heart of the island. As I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that the jungle itself was alive, watching me, conspiring with my hunter. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and every tree seemed to hide a lurking threat. Suddenly, the path opened up into another clearing. In the center stood an old, decrepit hut, its roof sagging and walls covered in thick vines. It looked like it had been abandoned for years. I approached cautiously, my eyes scanning the surrounding jungle for any sign of my pursuer. The hut was my only option for temporary shelter, and I had to take it. I pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside, the smell of decay and mildew hitting me immediately. The interior was dark, with only slivers of moonlight filtering through the broken roof. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that the hut was filled with old, broken furniture and piles of yellowed papers scattered across the floor. I picked up one of the papers, my hands trembling. It was covered in frantic, scrawled notes, diagrams of the island, detailed maps, and cryptic messages about a hunt. My stomach churned with fear as I realized this place had been used by whoever was hunting me. The drawings on the walls depicted twisted, nightmarish scenes of people being chased and captured. My mind raced with horror. This was no ordinary island, it was a trap, a playground for a sadistic game of life and death. As I backed away from the walls, my foot hit something hard. I looked down and saw a small metal box, partially buried under a pile of debris. I knelt and pried it open, revealing a collection of old photographs. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized some of the faces. They were my friends. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about me, my friends had been part of this twisted game too. I had to get out of there. I had to find a way off the island and get help. But as I turned to leave, I heard a sound that froze me in my tracks, a soft, deliberate tapping at the window. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned to face the window. There, in the moonlight, was the shadowy figure. They stood motionless, watching me with those empty, hollow eyes. Panic surged through me, and I backed away, my mind racing. I had to find a way out. The figure moved closer, their hand pressing against the glass. I bolted for the door, but it burst open before I could reach it. The figure lunged at me, and I barely managed to dodge, scrambling back into the hut. I grabbed a broken chair leg and swung it wildly, keeping the figure at bay. They laughed, a low, mocking sound that sent chills down my spine. This was a game to them, and they were enjoying every moment of my fear. I had to stay focused, had to find a way to survive. Desperation drove me to the far side of the hut, where I spotted a narrow ladder leading up to a loft. I climbed up, my hands shaking, and pulled the ladder up behind me. The loft was small and cramped, filled with old crates and more yellowed papers. I pressed myself into a corner, trying to calm my racing heart and quiet my breathing. Below, the figure searched the hut, their footsteps heavy on the creaking floorboards. I could hear them muttering to themselves, a chilling reminder of their madness. I clutched the chair leg, ready to defend myself if they found me. Minutes felt like hours as I waited, each second stretching my nerves to the breaking point. Then, I heard the sound of the door creaking open and the footsteps retreating. I waited, straining to hear any sign of their return. When I was sure they had left, I carefully climbed down from the loft and peered out the window. The clearing was empty, but I knew better than to trust the silence. My pursuer was still out there, watching, waiting for their next move. I needed to get to the raft. It was my only hope of escape. I gathered my courage and stepped outside, keeping to the shadows as I made my way back to the narrow path. The jungle was eerily quiet, and every rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, constantly glancing over my shoulder. The path twisted and turned, leading me deeper into the heart of the island. I had no choice but to follow it, hoping it would eventually lead me back to the beach. My ankle throbbed with each step, but I pushed through the pain. I couldn't afford to slow down. As I rounded a bend, I saw a faint light in the distance. Hope surged through me, and I quickened my pace. The light grew brighter as I approached, and I realized it was coming from another campfire. But as I neared the clearing, my heart sank. The scene before me was a nightmare. The campfire flickered in the night, casting eerie shadows over the scene. Lying on the ground were more of my friends, their bodies twisted and lifeless. I choked back a sob, my mind reeling with horror. This was a killing ground, and I was next. I turned to run, but a hand grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. I found myself face to face with the shadowy figure. Their eyes were cold and empty, and a twisted smile played on their lips. I swung the chair leg, but they caught it effortlessly, wrenching it from my grasp. "Game over," they whispered, their voice a chilling rasp. I struggled, kicking and clawing, but their grip was iron. They dragged me towards the campfire, their laughter echoing through the night. Desperation fueled my every move, and I managed to twist free, stumbling back into the jungle. I ran blindly, the darkness closing in around me. The footsteps followed, relentless and terrifying, a constant reminder of my impending doom. My breath came in ragged gasps, my lungs burning with the effort. I had to keep moving. I had to survive. The jungle seemed to go on forever, an endless maze of shadows and fear. My mind raced, searching for a way out. I stumbled into another clearing, and there, in the center, was a small cliff overlooking the ocean. Below, the waves crashed against the rocks, a dizzying drop to certain death. I had nowhere else to go. I backed towards the edge, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of my pursuer. The figure emerged from the jungle, their eyes locked on me. They moved slowly, deliberately, savoring the moment. I looked over the edge, my heart pounding in my chest. I had two choices: jump and risk the fall, or face my hunter and almost certain death. As the figure closed in, I made my decision. I took a deep breath and leapt, the wind rushing past me as I fell towards the churning ocean below. The world spun around me, a blur of darkness and water. I hit the water hard, the impact knocking the breath from my lungs. I struggled to the surface, gasping for air. The waves tossed me around, and I fought to stay afloat, my limbs heavy with exhaustion. I looked up at the cliff, but the figure was gone. For now, I was safe. But I knew I couldn't stay in the water forever. I had to find a way back to the beach, back to the raft. It was my only hope of escape. With the last of my strength, I swam towards the shore, the sound of the crashing waves my only guide. The island loomed in the darkness, a sinister silhouette against the night sky. I had to keep moving, had to stay ahead of my hunter. The ocean's relentless waves battered me, pulling me under and tossing me like a rag doll. Each time I surfaced, I gulped in precious air before being dragged down again. My muscles ached, and every stroke felt like lifting weights, but I forced myself to swim toward the distant shore. The island loomed dark and foreboding against the night sky, a monstrous silhouette that promised more terror. Finally, my feet touched the sandy bottom. I stumbled onto the beach, collapsing onto the wet sand, gasping for breath. The salty air burned my lungs, but I was alive. I had escaped the cliff, but I knew it was only temporary. My pursuer was still out there, hunting me, waiting for the right moment to strike again. As I lay there, gathering my strength, I noticed the raft I had seen earlier. It was partially hidden among the rocks, its haphazard construction a testament to someone's desperate attempt to escape. My heart leapt with a mix of hope and fear. The raft was my only chance to leave the island, but it had been sabotaged. I needed to find a way to repair it. I crawled over to the raft, inspecting the damage. The ropes holding the logs together had been cut, and several planks were missing. I searched the beach, my eyes scanning the dark shoreline for anything I could use to fix it. I found some driftwood and pieces of old rope, remnants of past shipwrecks perhaps, and set to work. The night was eerily quiet, the only sounds the gentle lapping of waves and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I worked quickly, my hands shaking with a mix of exhaustion and fear. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat, and the sensation of being watched never left me. Suddenly, a twig snapped behind me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Slowly, I turned to see a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the jungle, watching me. The moonlight glinted off a knife in their hand, and I knew I had to act fast. I grabbed a piece of driftwood and held it like a club, backing away from the raft. The figure stepped forward, their movements slow and deliberate. They were toying with me, enjoying the fear in my eyes. I had to stay calm, had to think of a way out. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice trembling. The figure tilted their head, a chilling smile playing on their lips. They said nothing, their silence more terrifying than any words. They took another step forward, and I swung the driftwood, but they easily dodged it, laughing softly. I backed up further, my mind racing. I needed a plan. I glanced at the raft, then at the jungle behind the figure. If I could just create a diversion, maybe I could get to the raft and push off before they could stop me. But how? My eyes landed on a pile of rocks near the beach. I grabbed a handful and hurled them at the figure, hoping to buy myself some time. They flinched, raising an arm to shield their face, and I seized the moment. I dashed toward the raft, pushing it into the water with all my strength. The figure recovered quickly, sprinting after me. I scrambled onto the raft, using a piece of driftwood as a makeshift paddle. The raft wobbled and threatened to come apart, but I pushed it away from the shore, my heart pounding with desperation. The figure reached the water's edge, their eyes blazing with anger. They shouted something unintelligible, their voice lost in the roar of the waves. I paddled furiously, the distance between us growing with each stroke. The raft creaked and groaned, but it held together. I dared to hope that I had escaped, that I was finally safe. But as I looked back at the island, I saw the figure retreating into the jungle. My relief was short-lived. They would find another way to reach me, I was sure of it. Hours passed as I drifted on the open sea, the island becoming a distant shadow on the horizon. The stars above were my only companions, their cold light offering little comfort. I tried to stay alert, but exhaustion weighed heavily on my eyelids. I had to stay awake, had to stay vigilant. Just as I began to doze off, a loud splash jolted me awake. My eyes snapped open, and I saw the figure swimming toward the raft, their knife glinting in the moonlight. Panic surged through me, and I grabbed my makeshift paddle, ready to defend myself. The figure reached the raft, their wet hand gripping the edge. I swung the paddle, but they caught it effortlessly, twisting it out of my grasp. I kicked out, trying to push them away, but they were relentless. They climbed onto the raft, their cold eyes locking onto mine. "This ends now," they hissed, their voice a low, menacing growl. I backed away, my mind racing. The raft rocked precariously, the water threatening to spill over the edges. I needed to do something, anything, to survive. My eyes landed on the knife in their hand, and I lunged for it, desperation giving me strength. We struggled, the knife glinting dangerously between us. I could feel their breath on my face, their eyes filled with a mix of rage and glee. The raft swayed violently, and I knew we were moments away from capsizing. With a surge of adrenaline, I twisted the knife from their grasp and plunged it into their side. They gasped, their eyes wide with shock and pain. Blood blossomed around the wound, staining the water a dark red. They stumbled back, falling into the sea with a splash. I collapsed onto the raft, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The knife was still in my hand, slick with blood. I watched as the figure struggled in the water, their movements growing weaker. Finally, they disappeared beneath the waves, and I was alone. The adrenaline slowly ebbed, leaving me shaking and exhausted. I had survived, but at what cost? The image of their eyes, filled with pain and anger, haunted me. I had defended myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare was far from over. I paddled aimlessly, the sea stretching endlessly around me. The sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the water. I spotted a small island in the distance, and I paddled toward it, my body aching with every movement. I didn't know if it was a safe haven or another trap, but I had no other choice. As I reached the shore, I collapsed onto the sand, my strength finally giving out. I looked back at the vast ocean, wondering if I had truly escaped. The memory of the shadowy figure, their cold eyes and mocking laughter, lingered in my mind. I lay on the beach of the new island, my body exhausted and my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. The rising sun cast long shadows across the sand, and the waves lapped gently at my feet, a stark contrast to the turmoil inside me. I had survived the night and the deadly encounter, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't truly safe. After a few moments of rest, I forced myself to stand. Every muscle protested, but I knew I couldn't stay on the beach. I needed to find shelter and figure out my next move. The island was smaller than the one I had just escaped, with dense jungle covering most of the interior. I scanned the shoreline, searching for any signs of life or potential danger. As I moved inland, the sense of being watched returned, stronger than ever. The jungle was eerily quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through me. I couldn't shake the feeling that my pursuer was still out there, biding their time, waiting for the right moment to strike. I stumbled upon a small, dilapidated hut nestled among the trees. It looked similar to the one I had found on the previous island, but this one seemed even older, its walls covered in thick vines and moss. I approached cautiously, my eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The door creaked loudly as I pushed it open, and I stepped inside, the musty smell of decay filling my nostrils. The interior was dark and cramped, with broken furniture and piles of debris scattered across the floor. I found a rusted knife among the wreckage and picked it up, clutching it tightly as I searched for anything that might help me survive. As I rummaged through the debris, I came across a faded journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. I opened it carefully, scanning the handwritten entries for any useful information. The journal belonged to someone who had been stranded on the island years ago. The entries detailed their descent into madness as they tried to survive, their fear and desperation palpable in every word. My heart sank as I read about their encounters with a shadowy figure that hunted them relentlessly. The descriptions matched my own experiences, and I realized with a sickening dread that I wasn't the first to be trapped in this nightmare. As I read the final entry, my blood ran cold. The author had set a trap for their pursuer, a desperate, final attempt to end the torment. The entry ended abruptly, the ink smeared as if the writer had been interrupted. I knew what I had to do. I had to set a trap and confront my hunter once and for all. I spent the next few hours gathering supplies and preparing the trap. I used the remnants of the hut to create a makeshift barricade near a cliff edge, similar to the one I had escaped from the night before. The plan was simple: lure my pursuer into the trap and use the terrain to my advantage. It was risky, but I had no other choice. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the island, I took my position behind the barricade, clutching the rusted knife tightly. The jungle was eerily silent, the anticipation hanging heavy in the air. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of my pursuer. Every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig set my nerves on edge, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as darkness began to envelop the island, I heard the familiar sound of footsteps approaching. My breath caught in my throat as I saw the shadowy figure emerge from the jungle, their eyes locked onto mine. They moved slowly, deliberately, savoring the moment. I backed up, leading them toward the trap, my heart racing with fear and determination. The figure followed, their eyes never leaving me. I reached the edge of the cliff and stood my ground, the barricade at my back. The figure stopped a few feet away, their cold eyes glinting in the fading light. They smiled, a chilling, twisted grin that sent shivers down my spine. "This ends now," I said, my voice trembling but determined. The figure laughed softly, the sound a low, menacing growl. They stepped forward, raising their knife. I held my ground, waiting for the right moment. As they lunged at me, I sidestepped, using their momentum against them. They stumbled, their eyes widening with surprise as they crashed into the barricade. I pushed with all my strength, the rusted nails and broken wood digging into their flesh. They screamed, a sound of pure rage and pain, as the barricade gave way, sending them over the edge of the cliff. I watched, my breath coming in ragged gasps, as they disappeared into the darkness below. The island was silent once more, the only sound my own labored breathing. I had done it. I had confronted my hunter and survived. But as I stood there, staring into the abyss, I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare wasn't over. The memory of their cold eyes and twisted smile would haunt me forever. I turned away from the cliff, the weight of exhaustion and relief pressing down on me. I had won the deadly game, but the cost had been high. The scars of the hunt would stay with me, a constant reminder of the terror and desperation I had endured. As I made my way back to the beach, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon. I spotted a small boat hidden in a cove, half buried in the sand. My heart leapt with hope. I had a way off the island. I rushed to the boat, my hands trembling as I pushed it into the water. I climbed in and grabbed the oars, my muscles protesting with every movement. As I rowed away from the island, I looked back one last time. The shadows seemed to shift and dance, as if the island itself was watching me leave. I turned my gaze to the horizon, focusing on the glimmer of hope that lay ahead. The boat cut through the water, each stroke taking me further from the nightmare. But as the island faded into the distance, a chilling sound reached my ears, a soft, deliberate whistle, carried on the wind. My blood ran cold, and I looked back, but the island was empty. I turned my focus back to the horizon, refusing to let the fear consume me. I had survived the hunt, and I was free. The open sea stretched out before me, a promise of safety and escape. But deep down, I knew that the memory of the island and its deadly game would stay with me forever, a haunting reminder of the terror I had faced. As I rowed toward the rising sun, the first glimmer of a ship appeared on the horizon. I allowed myself a small, weary smile. My nightmare was over. I was going home. The small boat cut through the still waters, the horizon glowing with the promise of dawn. My muscles ached with every stroke of the oars, but I couldn't afford to rest. I glanced back at the island, now a dark silhouette against the growing light. The memory of the soft, deliberate whistle still echoed in my mind, sending shivers down my spine. I had to keep moving. I had to reach the ship I had spotted in the distance. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the water, I allowed myself a moment of hope. The ship was getting closer, its sails catching the morning breeze. I could see figures moving on deck, and my heart leapt with relief. I was almost there. But the sense of unease never left me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched, that my pursuer was somehow still out there, lurking in the shadows. Every splash of water and creak of the boat made my heart race. I forced myself to focus on the ship, rowing with renewed determination. The ship's crew spotted me and began to shout, their voices carrying over the water. They lowered a small rowboat and began to row toward me. I could see their concerned faces, hear their questions, but their words were a blur. My mind was consumed with the fear that I wasn't truly safe yet. The crew reached me and helped me into their rowboat, their hands steady and reassuring. They pulled my small boat alongside, securing it to theirs. As we rowed back to the ship, I glanced back at the island one last time. It seemed peaceful, almost idyllic in the morning light. But I knew the truth. The island was a place of nightmares, and I would carry its scars forever. On board the ship, the crew fussed over me, offering blankets and hot tea. I accepted their kindness gratefully, the warmth a welcome contrast to the cold fear that still gripped my heart. The captain, a weathered man with kind eyes, sat beside me, listening as I recounted my ordeal. "We'll get you to safety," he assured me. "We'll be in port by evening. You can contact your family, get medical attention." I nodded, but my mind was still racing. The memory of the shadowy figure, their cold eyes and twisted smile, haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the nightmare wasn't over. As the ship sailed away from the island, I tried to rest. The crew gave me a small cabin, and I lay down on the narrow bunk, exhaustion pulling me into a fitful sleep. My dreams were filled with dark shadows and relentless footsteps, the terror of the hunt playing out over and over. I woke with a start, my heart pounding. The cabin was dark, the ship's gentle rocking a stark contrast to the horrors of my dreams. I sat up, trying to shake off the lingering fear. I needed to get some fresh air, clear my mind. I made my way to the deck, the cool night air a welcome relief. The ship sailed smoothly through the water, the stars twinkling overhead. I leaned against the railing, taking deep breaths, trying to calm my racing heart. That's when I heard a soft, deliberate whistle, carried on the wind. My blood ran cold, and I turned, scanning the deck for any sign of my pursuer. The shadows seemed to shift and dance, and for a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the far end of the deck. I blinked, and they were gone. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. I was not safe. The nightmare was not over. I hurried back to the cabin, my mind racing. I had to stay alert, had to be ready for whatever came next. The hours passed slowly, each creak of the ship and whisper of the wind setting my nerves on edge. I couldn't sleep, couldn't rest. The fear was too strong, the memories too vivid. I kept the rusted knife close, my only means of defense. As dawn began to break, casting a soft light over the ship, I ventured back to the deck. The crew was already awake, preparing for our arrival in port. The sight of land in the distance brought a wave of relief, but it was tempered by the lingering fear that I was still being hunted. The ship docked, and the crew helped me disembark. The bustling port was a stark contrast to the isolation of the island, the noise and activity a welcome distraction. The captain insisted on accompanying me to the authorities, ensuring I was safe and cared for. As I spoke with the authorities, recounting my ordeal once more, I couldn't shake the feeling that my pursuer was still out there. The memory of the whistle, the shadowy figure, haunted me. I glanced around the busy port, half expecting to see those cold, empty eyes watching me from the crowd. The authorities assured me they would investigate, that they would find whoever was responsible for my torment. But their words offered little comfort. The fear was too deep, the scars too fresh. I was free from the island, but the terror had followed me. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, life began to return to a semblance of normalcy. I reunited with my family, sought therapy to help cope with the trauma. But the fear never fully left me. Every shadow, every unexpected sound, set my nerves on edge. One evening, as I sat on the porch of my family's home, watching the sunset, I heard it again, the soft, deliberate whistle, carried on the breeze. My heart stopped, and I turned, scanning the yard for any sign of my pursuer. There was no one there, but the fear gripped me once more. I knew then that the nightmare would never truly be over. I had escaped the island, but the terror had become a part of me, a constant reminder of the horrors I had faced. I would carry the memory of the hunt with me forever, a scar that would never fully heal.